Welcome to Just an Average Citizen. This is the Week in Review, Week at a Glance, and some bonus material all thrown in together. This is the podcast that helps you understand how you can be more educated, informed, and engaged as a citizen in your city so that you know what needs to happen and the steps to get there so that our community will be the best that it can be, or the best that it was created to be. So I hope you've been enjoying some of these highlights that have been happening along the way. It is a work in progress because there are times that we need to know information, and sometimes getting that information is really hard these days. In fact, you really can only find pretty much most of the information is on the website, where the city has a lot of great information, but it's hard to navigate. Or you watch the news and sometimes you may get a balanced report of what has happened, which is, I think, happened this week. Or you might find one that has an agenda that you didn't know that was there. And so you feel that you are informed while you're actually being led to an opinion that you might not hold if you had all the facts. And so that's part of what we're trying to do, is give you a place of finding the resources you need to know how to attack problems and issues you see, and also how to celebrate and come along those who are succeeding in what we're doing as a city. So I hope you've found some things helpful along the way. So one of the things that's super important that I cannot go much further without addressing is the fact that elections are happening right now. And if you didn't know, early voting started October 23rd, and it will end November 3rd. And then election day is actually Tuesday, November 7th. And there are many locations all over town. If you look up on the Taylor County Elections website, you will see all the locations you can find, or, be happy to leave a comment and I will give you that information if you want to know more about that. It is important that as an average citizen, we understand that unaverage people know the importance of voting. So average citizens should know that that's the basic start. We need to vote. We need to let our voices be heard. And if we're not showing up to vote consistently, then we are creating a greater problem than we realize. So this election, there are several things on the ballot I think are very important for us as citizens to know. And this show is not going to be one that I share my opinion, but I'm going to give you information and I'm going to let you see what's available so that you can make your own decision. So on the ballot this year, there are 14 constitutional amendments for the state of Texas that are a little challenging to read if you don't have some great resources. And so I'll try and share some of that information so you will know where some information can be found on those constitutional amendments. Because if you just read the amendment when you show up to vote, you're going to be confused and you won't even know what it's really saying. And unfortunately, that's the language it's written in. So we have to do a little bit more work before we show up. But the good news is you can bring out a printed guide, or you can make notes so that when you show up, you can make that process super quick and easy and not a source of frustration. The other thing on the ballot this year are several bonds. There's an Abilene Taylor County bond for the venue district that they're wanting to create for the next 20 years, and you can decide whether that is a great option for you. The bottom line is bonds are taxes, and we have to be aware that just because it sounds like a good idea, we have to make the decision if that's something we want to increase our taxes over. And sometimes that's a yes, sometimes it's a no. The other three bonds, if you're an Abilene resident, is the one for the zoo, the one for the recreation centers, and the one for the trails. And so there's some information you can look on the city's website for, but there's also some great resources on learning what those bonds actually mean and what it will do to your taxes. And as long as you're educated and informed and you vote the way you want to vote, then I feel like I will be successful. You don't have to agree with me. You just need to be educated and informed. And so I do know there's some school bonds on some other locations for Wiley and Merkel, and I believe Jim Ned. And so you just need to know what they're asking and what it means, because anytime the city or the county asks for money, it's going to come out of your pocket. And that's the way it works. That's the way it's always meant to work. So this week has been not super active, but there's been some great meetings, and I'm always impressed. I think, oh, there's nothing happening in the city this week. And then I'm like, oh, wow, that was really exciting. Or, wow, I wasn't expecting that to go in that direction. And so there is a little bit of fun watching what happens in our city. And you can call me a nerd, I guess, if I say this is fun, because that's real life drama. Sometimes it's exciting drama and sometimes it doesn't seem to be that engaging, but it's okay. You never know. And so that's why I always love when I get surprised. at what happens when I least expect it. So let's look at the first event that happened this week. It was on Tuesday. It was the Firemen's Relief and Retirement Fund Board agenda. And what's great about this is I do believe it was set up in place to help make sure we take care and resolve issues that the firemen see in making sure they get paid correctly, or paid sufficiently is, I guess, a better way to say it, because we know one of the major, if not the main tasks that our city is set to do with our tax money is to make sure we have public safety. We want to make sure our firemen are compensated well so that they can do their job and they don't burn out early. We want to make sure our police officers are well equipped to do the task at hand. And so that has been something I'm still learning a lot more about. So I don't have a lot of information to share with you on this particular board meeting, but it looks like they talked about financial statements. They talked about contribution increases from the members and also setting dates for upcoming trustee elections. So please make sure you check that out and see what's going on at those meetings. Now, I will have to say I'm a history nerd. I love this kind of stuff. So what I really enjoyed about this Landmarks Commission meeting is they had the old Thomas Everett Furniture Building. There you can see a picture of it. It is, at that time, I believe it was a filling station from the 1931 through 1951. They cut out some of the walls and made it to where cars could drive under there. And you can see some historic, this little awning right here, I don't know if you see my arrow, is actually is why this gentleman is before the board. But what I have to say, or the Landmark Commission, what I have to say is he was impressive. All the information, all the historic research he has done throughout the years to make sure that his interpretation of what was there is actually reflective of the historic nature of this building. And I am just so excited to check this building out. There was Art Deco found on the ceiling. The tiles were the original tiles. He said there was gold leaf in the window trim. And to me, that is such an intricate detail that you would not think you would find in a typical filling station. But he has done a great job restoring and making this look like what it did. He said he had to replace all the Coca-Cola light bulbs, the sign light bulbs, and it costs like $1,800. And it is an intricate process. And so when people take the time and energy to restore these things, we want to make sure that we give them the proper acknowledgement. In fact, he was even invited to join the Landmark Commission because of just his interest in making sure things were accurately represented. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I think that we can learn a lot from what they're trying to do. And this historic overlay really only addresses the outside. So what he did on the inside was not something that was as much concern to this commission, but it was what he did to make sure the impression of this building by its external features represented what Abilene Old Town should represent. The next building that was brought before this commission was actually the personal home of a lawyer. Let me see if I can get there. And it was Harry Tom King and his wife. He was a lawyer and a judge in Abilene. It was built around 1910. It is a 2-story Queen Anne style with Beaux Arts neoclassical influences, and it has this really neat tower in the middle of the house. And they're putting it for approval so that it can have the historic reference or this historic overlay so that it can be protected, because it is truly a work of art that is in this neighborhood, and the owners have done a great job. You can see they're restoring it and making it look very nice and taking care of it. And so I think this is another great story of just some of the history of Abilene being preserved. Now, what I love about this story is this middle picture right here was actually the front of the building, and this was the back, and that there are some surveys that were done that showed the street was right here where my arrow was, and that the back of the house was actually where the backyard was. So have you ever lived in a house where your front yard and backyard flip-flopped without anything ever happening? And so little fun history stories that we get to hear about our city gives us a connection to what has taken place before us and how important it is for us to continue preserving the good things that our city can offer. Now, we will move on to the city council meeting, and this meeting was surprisingly more engaging than probably most people expected. What most people, if you haven't followed along with what's been going on, it's October 2nd, the Visual Arts Jury Board had a meeting for the sculpture, the kitty corn sculpture, and that meeting was canceled until the next week. And so the next week they actually had the Visual Arts Jury Board meeting, and there were some concerned citizens who came before the board and asked for them to pick a less controversial statue. And that's key here, because the citizens weren't asking for the jury board to change the theme or get the nickel to change the theme or get the calf to change the theme of the upcoming calf festival or the calf event that happens in June. It was just to pick a different statue that was less controversial because the illustrator had done over 100 illustrations. So there was lots to choose from. And so at that meeting, because it was the first time anyone showed up to the board meeting, they decided to table it to do more research and recognize the significance of citizens showing up for the first time ever to address a sculpture being presented for the Storybook Gardens. The next week, there was another meeting that happened where more citizens showed up and shared and expressed their opinions. And there was a letter read from the illustrator, and there was a lot of activity that happened. But again, the request was just to pick a different statue or a different sculpture for the gardens so that the community could feel the connection to it rather than feeling like they were unable to have a say in what went in the community gardens. And so many people think that the public was heard and that there was a place for input. But unfortunately, there are steps along the way that made it to where if it was to be changed, it really was going to be financially probably a challenge. And so it was hard for things to change. And this is the first time this has ever happened. A lot of us don't know exactly what's been going on, and we're learning about it, and we're becoming engaged, educated, and informed. And so we're trying to work through this process. And so the final decision was made at the city council meeting this week because the Visual Arts Jury Board recommended the statue to be placed, and the city council had some citizens come in and give their opinions. It's really interesting, though, how challenging it is for many of us who work or have schedules that have not allowed us to come to city council meetings to make our voices heard. So the natural place to do that would be to email your city council members and let them know your thoughts. You can email them all in one email from the city website, or you can email them individually and let them know what your thoughts are. So it's important for us to do that, to give them feedback, not just when we're upset and angry or frustrated, but when we're grateful for what they're doing. And so because they used one councilman used some of the statistical numbers of those present to confirm his decision, it seems like some of the other citizens who weren't able to come didn't necessarily get to have the impact that they may have hoped. But we just have to work with what we're given. And now that we know that numbers do matter in optics, it's important that we can make time to show up to things that matter. And so, it's a learning curve. We are hoping that the city council will move one of their meetings to the evening, so those who cannot attend in the morning will be able to make at least one meeting a month, be able to attend at night, and we'll see if we can get that accomplished. But, just because the citizens speak doesn't mean it represents the full city. And I will say that it is scary to step out and stand up before the council. It can be challenging. You can think, oh my gosh, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I stumble? And it is a little intimidating if you're not one that likes to speak in public. And it's also scary because there are sometimes the news stations there and they do record what you say. And then there are people in social media world that have opinions about you. And sometimes it can be hurtful if you look at those opinions. But what we have to decide as a community is that when we see something, we need to say something. We need to do the right thing regardless of the outcome, because it takes citizens willing to stand up for what matters, that allows our community to have a complete reflection of what's going on in our community. And a lot of us have sat by, including myself, have sat by in the past and just let other people carry the water for us or take the brunt of the force. And there is some damage that needs to be repaired. And I think things like this, we shouldn't see them as problematic. We should be excited that the community is engaged and ready to have conversations about it. Now, I don't think many people even know what's going on with this, because most people haven't been following, or you may have not watched the videos I've been sharing, or even if you haven't caught it on the news, you may not even know that this controversial conversation has happened. What I'll say is, from seeing this from the beginning to the end, I was very excited to hear that one councilman had paid attention to listen to what the issue was, which was the controversy over the statue. It wasn't about the book. It wasn't about the illustrator. It wasn't about any of those things. It was just that we wanted something that some of the citizens, including myself, I guess I have to come clean there, wanted a different statue that was less controversial. And so one councilman did see that and voted accordingly, and the rest of them missed the significance of what was being asked of them because they got distracted with the book and the subject of the book. It wasn't that they had to agree with the book or find that they approved of what the message of the book was. It was that there were citizens who were uncomfortable with the statue being put as reflective of the entire community. And of course, it's a cute statue. I mean, how can we disparage, wrong one. How can we disparage this cute little unicorn and cat? But again, it's not about the quality of the product. It's that the product is causing some controversy, and we don't want that to be something that causes problems for the storybook capital of America. The next item on the agenda that I thought was of interest was also pulled from the consent agenda item, so it could be discussed separately and not voted as a whole, was the APD Real-Time Information Center, RTIC server proposal. So they wanted to expand and needed to purchase a server to continue its growth. And so this is something about helping. They've been doing this for 8 months, and it has been successful in utilizing existing city-owned cameras mounted on city property. And APD is working to acquire camera feeds from traffic cameras already owned by the city. Future access to cameras from our state partners will also be possible, because if you've watched the video series before, you know the Metropolitan group, the meeting that that was held last week, also is wanting to put in cameras throughout the city. And the only thing I would say is, while this seems great, we always have to be cautious and careful when we give things away to give a feeling of more security. We are giving away our freedoms. And so while this may be helpful for the police department, it is costing us some of our freedom, because one of the councilmen brought up the point that, well, if this street shot is of my backyard and the police can look in my backyard through this video camera, what does that mean for me as a private citizen? Am I being monitored? Are you going to look and see what I'm doing in my backyard? And lo and behold, I do something that you think is illegal, then that is something that crosses a line. And so it seems that when they come up for the resolution for this proposal, that there will be some policy wording in there to help make sure that if there is something that is of a private nature, regardless of what's going on, if it's in your backyard, you should not be recorded by the police unless you've said okay to it. And so what they're going to do is create a way to blur out that material, and instead of even saving the full video, that it'll be saved with only the public spaces being recorded. So there's no storage whatsoever, is what I understood that they said they were going to work on proposing. So they're trying to move forward. And again, this is not necessarily bad in of itself, but we just have to keep thinking that when we give away freedoms for security, it's costing us something. And what does that cost? And so is the cost worth it? That's something you have to decide. And if you decide that it is worth it, then great. And if it's something, they're going in that direction. But if it's something you decide is not worth giving up your freedom to allow the police to have better views of what's going on in certain locations in our city, then it's up to you to say, hey, listen, this is not something I'm okay with for this reason and this reason. And again, it's not because you're angry, frustrated, or mad. You're just saying, this is my opinion. And unless we share our opinions with our elected officials, they won't know what we want or need. And so that's got to be a better habit of, emailing them and just saying, I saw this was on the city council meeting, or I heard about this. Can you explain more to me? And ask questions about what you want to happen, so that you ask clarifying questions so that you can come across in a way that builds rapport rather than creates friction. And, there's a lot of negativity that happens, I'm sure, to our elected officials, more than we know. And we don't want to be part of the problem that is just that, nagging symbol. We want to be someone who creates spaces for effective and positive things to move forward. And we can only do that through healthy and balanced conversations, not ones to just complain. I mean, I try to always say thank you for your service. I don't always do that well, but I do try to thank them for being willing to serve as our councilman, because that is a big job and they get a lot of feedback. And I would dare say most of it's not always positive. It's easier to complain about things than it is to point things out. So if you're like, man, this is awesome, I love it, then send them an email and say, I love that y'all are expanding the Real-Time Information Center. Yay. Or if you're like, wow, I really don't know if this freedom is worth giving up over this. And so there's a way to always bring balance and kindness in our communication for sure. All right. The next thing we're going to look at is the item number 11. And I'm going to show this to you really quickly. This is what they say. It's a whole discussion to change zoning. And so we've talked about this on our program before about the zoo is an agricultural open space. And so what they're trying to do is keep the zoo an agricultural open space, but the space next to the zoo where the Dodge Jones building is, the dog park, and that whole strip right there from Highway 36 all the way to the train tracks. They're trying to rezone that so that they can do more sports activities in that location. And so I thought it was really interesting. I love reading this agenda packet because I find out so many neat details. And again, you can think I'm a nerd. I'm doing a podcast over what it means to be a good citizen. So clearly I am walking in that way. But one of the things I do enjoy is that when things like this come up, they ask the neighbors, they ask the citizens within a certain radius what their opinions are. And there were two really enjoyable comments, just knowing that there are people who are awake and paying attention. And I like that. I like that they're engaged. They recognize that the zoo is a source of tourism. And where is the line? Where do citizens pay for tourism attractions, and where should we look at the tourists to pay for, and so there's a line that we're learning more about and the different locations in our city. There was another one that talked about all the animals. What's going to happen when you rezone that? Well, all the animals come into our neighborhood. What are you going to do with that? And it's like, wow, I never even thought about where the displaced animals will go. Clearly, they're going to go into more residential areas. And, I'm okay with not having skunks come into my neighborhood, but what does that look like? And so that's where we learn a lot of great information. And this is the form on the City Council agenda. If you're watching the video, you can see this gives the general information and helps you understand what they're going to be discussing before you actually go to the meeting. All right, the next one that we're going to look at is number 14. And so this is to a resolution to contract an engineering company for the Lake Fort Phantom Recreational Development and Parks Master Plan. And so there was a survey or engineering firm that came and did something back in 2009, but it was more about like the streets around the roads around the reservoir and just functional purpose. It was more of a functional engineering survey that they did. And so they have that information. Now this one is purely for recreational information. And so, they want to know, they're going to be looking at a survey. And so I'm going to be watching because I've never seen a city survey. And so if I see it, I'll tell you about it. But they want to get feedback. I think the feedback is so important for us because when they ask for it, we need to give it. We need to be looking and we need to share it with our friends so that we can have more than a couple of hundred people giving feedback on major decisions that happen in our area. They're wanting to get feedback from the military personnel, which I think is great because they've lived in other places and they can give input to what's going on. One guy said, please make sure there's public bathrooms. And it's funny, you can think, oh, we're having fun. But if there's no place to use a restroom, that can be kind of a difficult situation. It is important for us to look at it. So the first phase is they're going to be looking at what we have. They're going to be taking an inventory of what we have. And then the second phase will be looking on what we can do with it. Here we go. There are only 5 parks. There are actually 5 parks around Fort Phantom, but there's only 2 developed. And so they want to look at potential cost involved. Phase 1 will be evaluation of what we have, and it'll cost about $126,000, and it'll take probably 30 weeks. I think is what they're working on. And then phase 2 is to engage with the public and the military, how they want to use it. They're going to use a Dallas-based firm that knows about Fort Phantom. They were the only firm that approached them to do this job based in Texas. And so there it is. So they're going to look at how to develop that. Again, this is another opportunity for our city to have a better quality of life. And we have to decide in our feedback to make sure they say, hey, listen, if there's some priorities that you think should be taken care of first, email the council members and say, hey, listen, I really want this taken care of first. Will this parks contract, will this master plan interfere with us taking care of those needs first? And ask that question because they may even have it on the agenda of things that they're wanting to accomplish. You just didn't know that yet. And so it's really important that we ask good questions when we email them so that they can give us the feedback and then we can give clarification to what we really want to make sure is addressed if it's not on there. Again, thank you for your service. Can you help me clarify this? It's a really important to engage in healthy conversation with them. And I think email is the best way because it allows them to respond when they have time. Because you remember, they have full-time jobs. This is not their only job. This is their high-paying dollar a year job, I think is what they get. So here we go. There's the phases. I forgot I had this. There's the different phase. Oh, okay, here we go. The whole project is going to take 30 weeks. I thought that was a long. Phase 1 is going to be 16 weeks. Phase 2 is 18 weeks. And they didn't talk a lot about Phase 3, which will take 12 weeks. And so there's a lot of potential we have in this resource very near to our city or included in our city. All right, we're going to move to the next item on the agenda that I think is of interest to you. It is the contract with Hibbs and Todd for the Cedar Ridge Waterway. What is that? The waterway right. So I didn't realize this is such a complicated process. And so they have been working very hard on making sure that we have the potential to use this water source in the future. And so it takes a few years. I don't know the exact time frames, but there's going to be two phases. It's going to cost a total of $290,000. And the first part of task 1 will get us the right permitting, the water right permitting, the technical service, the processing request, preparation, and all the things that will need to take place in order to be able to look at considering this. And then task 2, and that should cost about $160,000. Task 2 is, so it looks like some supportive contended case hearings if they're needed, and so that shouldn't exceed $130,000. And so this is something we're always worried about in West Texas, is where we're going to get our water from. You can see since September 2006, they have been working on this. In August 2011, they filed a state water right application with the Commission on Environmental Quality, the TCEQ, and they've been working on this a long time. And so in November 2013, they submitted a Federal Clean Water Act Section 404 permit application. And so it's interesting that you have to have a lot of forethought. And so I want to give kudos to our city for working on this and making sure that we have water in the future. It will take money, it will cost, and we need to start saving now so that we have the cash on hand to take care of these needs, like has been mentioned by the City Council. Okay, so the next item I thought would be important to address is the off-site signage discussion. And so this is not something I ever thought I would care about, but by listening, I'm seeing that there are so many nuances that go on in a city that it takes a lot of work to make sure all the parts are moving correctly. And so I will say, if nothing else, getting involved and becoming informed and educated will give you appreciation for all the hard work that our city council is required to do, and the city manager and all the staff to get all these pieces moving. And I'm just learning little bits here and there. And it's taken a while for this to get into a healthy, functioning system that we have. And so we don't want to come in and act like we have all the authority or the knowledge because we've attended a couple of council meetings. We want to make sure we walk in with humility and say, wow, we're still learning. But it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to make sure that we are understanding what's going on. And if you can find a councilman who really will take the time to give you that feedback, man, that is a great thing, because we cannot understand all the parts on our own, and we need to ask silly questions to some people. So let me know when you find that great councilman who's willing to answer those questions. So the off-site signage discussion sounds like it's not a big deal, but digital signs are becoming more and more the thing around our city. And so one of the gentlemen who came and spoke had already done 2 digital signs, not realizing that when he started the digital sign process, it was okay, but somehow it went to the Supreme Court in, I don't remember what year. I don't think they told us what year, but it went to the Supreme Court, and they realized that since that decision was made, the Supreme Court on this issue, they were not willing to agree to the same kind of situation that had happened previously. And so somehow there was some misunderstanding. And so when the gentleman bought more signage for future projects, he realized he got fined for being for not doing the right thing. And he was surprised because he didn't realize the law had changed, or there was some lack of information. I don't know exactly the situation, but there was some confusion and frustration because there has seemed to be some changing protocols. And so what seemed to take place is that they are going to discuss this and make sure it meets the best standard for everyone involved, that businesses can advertise in ways that are more modern and effective, and that the people who are surrounding will not be burdened by having to take in I think another gentleman mentioned the struggle of having this bright digital sign right across from this beautiful hotel, and how was that gonna change the experience of those people in the hotel. And so there are actually standards of where signage that is digital how bright it can be at night and stuff like that. So it is interesting to understand the process, and even people who have worked so closely in the city and done so many things with the city and been such a great resource in the city can find themselves on the wrong side of ordinances. And so let me encourage you, don't feel like if you mess up or misunderstand something, you're alone. There are people who've been doing way more than I've ever even thought I could ever do or understand, and they're still having to struggle and wrestle with what it means for functioning in the city. And so I think that's a sign of us having some healthier conversations, and the goal is to make sure our city is being who it was created to be. And by knowing this better and understanding from what others have done, I think we can really help make sure to be more successful in the future. We're getting close to the end here. The last thing I thought was interesting, which I failed to mention in this podcast, is at the beginning of the meeting, they honored the Development Corporation of Abilene for getting an International Development of the Year award. And that seems pretty significant. I think that I have seen great strides happen with what the DCOA is doing. That's the Development Corporation of Abilene. There was a vote that happened several years ago to give so much of our tax money to this group to be able to bring in businesses. And I think they have done a good job. The more I learn about it, I understand that they bring in small businesses as well as large businesses, because it takes everybody in this village, and even the local businesses have benefited from what DCOA is doing. And so when we're working on trying to create a better base for our city, we need to have good paying jobs that cover across the board in many areas. So they got an International Development of the Year award, and so congratulations to them, because that's significant. And it means that they're making impressions on people outside of our city. And that's a good thing for other cities to take note of. This particular project they're presenting to the board, the city council today, was Project Morello. It is a manufacturing oil and gas and equipment company. And they are going to bring in a business that they're hoping to have a 25,000 square foot expansion. And so they're going to be investing their capital of $25 million with the commitment to bring in 415 jobs, or keep 415 jobs, and then create 250 more jobs. And so once they meet those markers through the DCOA, they will, and I guess the good news, I didn't mention this, the good news about these jobs that they're talking about creating are on an average of $80,000. And so Misty Mayo specifically said that is double what the county average wage is. So that's good. I don't know what the city average wage is, but it is an improvement in the county for sure. And so that is a different type of job than even, I believe, like the cheese factory brought in. And so that's good. So we can see that once they meet these different markers along the way, they will get a $2,750,000 incentive that they'll meet once they approve certain markers. I can't remember the exact word to use, but so there is a commitment and investment of the company, and then the DCOA has the funding to give them an incentive once they achieve those goals. And so that's good. So we can be looking for more coming with that, and I'm always glad to see that we get some businesses. Oh, and I wanted to show this to you. This is a picture. I love this picture, just showing all the different places like Vista Flags and Lancium. And we have Amazon, Taiga, Dias Air Force Base. All these businesses and entities have benefited from the DCOA. And so that's good. We want to make sure we have somebody championing for us to bring those in and improve the quality of life overall for city. Okay, so now we're going to move to a week at a glance and look and see what's ahead for the week to come. So this is an interesting calendar week because the first part of it is October and the last part of it is November. And what's interesting in November and December is the city council meetings are usually on the 2nd and 4th throughout the rest of the year. But in November, they are on the 1st and 3rd of the month so that we avoid those holiday issues. And so we can look at the boards and commissions calendar to see what's going on this week. November 1st is Board of Building Standards, and it is available for us to look at the agenda already. And then we have the 911 Board of Directors that happens from 2 to 4 in meeting location to be determined. We don't know where they are unless you ask where those are going to be. And then we can skip down. This is good to go ahead and write on your calendar. We have Planning and Zoning on November 7th, the Betty Hardwick Center Board of Trustees on November 7th, Airport Development on November 8th, Board of Adjustments November 14th, Citizens Advisory Board for people with disabilities on November 14th, Park and Recreation for November 21st, Abilene Landmarks Commission on November 21st. And then we get to the City Council meeting. So this one is on November 2nd with this upcoming Thursday. And because they are posted typically on Friday, we can go ahead and look and see what the agenda meetings notes are. So I hope this has been a good podcast. This is a great start. I can talk more. I have had so much more to say. I think it's important for us to understand again, when we are educated and we are informed about what's going on, then we can respond better to the different challenges that happen along the way. And so we can also learn where we can actually join in. There are 27 boards that happen throughout. I don't think each one happens each month, but I would say in a quarter, there are at least most of those meet monthly. There are some that meet quarterly or yearly or biannually, but we can take on one board as a citizen to say, this is what I'm going to look into and see what happens on this board, so I can actually help make sure other people know what's going on. And when you find that niche and you find a way to contribute in that way, it will bring about some great changes for our city. It just has to. When we become more involved and engaged, we are going to make our city a better place. And so I know there's a lot of other entities outside the city government that are important and near and dear to our hearts, but we have to remember that we all have some ownership in what happens in our city. And the more we step up and vote and let them know through our voices by voting, then we can have better communication and we can see better results over the long haul. So just remember, just because you might feel average, if you are doing some of the things we've talked about today, and if you've taken the time to listen to this, you already have become more than an average citizen. I hope that gives you some information on how you can make your plans to see what meetings you want to attend and be a part of, or at least follow up and see with what happens, because sometimes things come up that we aren't expecting, and it's always good to take notice if you want to know more. It's always great to check out this podcast because I will give you the highlights so that you can see what you want to look more into, because we all have busy lives and we got to figure out where we can start making this a part of our normal routine and understanding what's going on with our city. So don't forget to vote. Make sure you show up and let your voice be heard. And thank you for being just another average citizen with me.